professionals. What I'd like to do is explore several cases with you that involve pilots. One of the cases that I think you'll find very interesting involved a Japan Airlines cargo flight. The captain was Kenji Teruchi, and he had several other men with him on this flight from Paris to Tokyo, following the polar route. They were carrying a load of Beaujolais wine, and once this event happened and I talked with the captain, I asked him the question, did you land with all the cases unopened? And he laughed and he said, yes, don't worry about that. We delivered our cargo adequately. They took off from Paris, as I said. They flew to Keflavik, Iceland for fuel, and then on to Anchorage. However, coming over the border of Canada into Alaska at cruise altitude on a dark night on autopilot, he described, and his first officer described, seeing a very strange set of lights. The first thing they saw were flickering yellow lights almost in a row, horizontal row, which they thought were afterburners of military jets ahead of them, like they were in trail behind a military flight. And that made some sense. However, it went from the 12 o'clock position very quickly off to about the 10 o'clock position, and then maintained the 10 o'clock relative to his bearing, and then moved back again to approximately the 12 o'clock position. Well, jet planes don't do that quickly. They don't move that rapidly. And so he began to be a little concerned that it wasn't what he thought it was. It was about his altitude. The stars were very bright. The air was crystal clear. He said he could see Fairbanks 100 and some miles ahead of him. It was so clear. Well, continuing on, this, by the way, was November 17th, 1986. The Japan Airlines flight was about 100 miles north of Fairbanks, and the air was so clear that he could actually see the city lights that distance away. And he has not started to come down yet. He's still at cruise altitude. He said then they noticed, generally ahead of them, a very large object outlined against the light of the sky. And he described it as being the length of at least 2 aircraft carriers end to end. That's very large. They continue on. I don't remember the airspeed, but it was at cruise airspeed, perhaps Mach 0.8, something like that, 0.85. As the aircraft is approaching Fairbanks, Captain Teruchi requests permission to execute a 360-degree turn to the right. And so he dials that into the autopilot and starts the high wing bank turn. And the object, very interestingly, maintains a relative fixed position off the left wingtip, which means, very importantly, that that object had to accelerate up to that new speed of the turn and then hold that speed around constant radius. That's very important because that implies thrust management. It implies a great deal of energy control and navigation and guidance. Well, after completing the turn, the 747 then levels out and is heading now for Anchorage to start its descent pretty soon. And the object is still out there on the left-hand side of the airplane. Well, Captain Teruchi then begins his descent to land, and there's an oncoming aircraft that is taken off from Anchorage, which is climbing now. And so he radios that captain, and he basically describes what's been happening and would you keep an eye out for it. When the two aircraft that are passing each other flash their landing lights just to identify each other, the UFO lights just disappear instantaneously. Well, to make a long story short, the aircraft lands safely at Anchorage, refuels, takes off, lands at Tokyo, and the cargo is delivered. I think a very interesting postscript to this event involving this Japan Airlines 747 is what happened to Captain Terauchi after he landed. Well, because of his report, his conscientiousness to fill out a report form and all the paperwork that goes with it, he was evaluated by the medical board of Japan Airlines, and he was asked to terminate his flying duties. Well, that's rather unfortunate. He's a good pilot. He's an excellent pilot. And so I happened to have an opportunity to talk with the medical director of Japan Airlines as he was visiting here in the States. And I asked him about Captain Terauchi and explained that I had done this analysis on the case. And I was very impressed with him as a pilot. And he informed me at that time that he was no longer flying. But he did invite me to submit materials to the airline explaining what I had learned. Well, I did that, and many months went by, and I learned later on that he had been reinstated. He is now flying again. I was very glad to hear that. Well, one of the facts I brought out in my material was that Captain Terauchi was a good pilot. He was an outstanding pilot. He maintained control of the airplane at all times. He landed on time. He delivered his cargo. He complied with all the requirements. He's playing it by the book, and yet this happened to him. I also pointed out that what he saw in the sky was really not all that unusual, that I have thousands of other cases from around the world going back many years which describe very large objects that perform amazing feats. It's important to realize that a pure visual sighting just is not as important as a correlated radar visual sighting. And this case qualifies. And so we have multiple eyewitnesses in the cockpit who confirm what the radar is telling them, you see. Well, I asked Captain Terauchi about the onboard radar. He has a weather radar on there. And he told me that they tried to image something on the weather radar and didn't receive any signals back from the aircraft now. Nonetheless, there was ground radar. That every aircraft, of course, has to be plotted where it is for safety reasons. And so ground radar had picked up not only the 747, as it should, but also this, quote, uncorrelated target, something near the airplane that shouldn't have been there. Why? Because it wasn't identified. They didn't know what it was. My name's Richard Haynes, and I've been a NASA research scientist since the mid-60s. I started my research in the area of visual perception and optics and lighting, and studying some problems for the Gemini program, the two-man capsule program that was orbital. And during the early stages of that research, I had a laboratory which would allow me to simulate the way things